There's a moment that happens on the side of the road. Quiet, almost invisible, but legally, it can change everything. You're sitting in your car, the engine is still running. Maybe your hands are on the wheel, maybe they're not. Red and blue lights are flashing behind you, reflecting off your rearview mirror. An officer walks up, calm, controlled, and then says something that sounds simple, but carries enormous weight. "I smell weed." And just like that, the entire situation shifts. What would you say in that moment? Would you try to explain yourself, defend yourself, stay silent, or say something that could unknowingly give away your rights? Think about it for a second, and let me know in the comments. What would you say if a police officer told you they smell marijuana in your car? Because the truth is, most people say the wrong thing. Not because they're guilty, but because they don't understand how powerful those 4 words really are. And what a lawyer would say in that exact moment might surprise you. Because this isn't just about weed. It's about how the law works, how police authority is interpreted, and how a single sentence, yours or theirs, can determine what happens next. To understand why those words matter so much, we need to go deeper, not into opinion, but into law, real cases, and how courts have interpreted situations just like this. Because in many places, especially in the United States, the phrase, "I smell weed," has historically been used as a legal gateway. A gateway to something called probable cause. And probable cause is one of the most powerful tools in law enforcement. It's what allows officers to search your vehicle without a warrant. Now imagine that for a moment. No judge, no paperwork, no delay. Just a statement, "I smell weed," and suddenly, your privacy can legally disappear. But here's where things get interesting, and where many people misunderstand the situation, because the law is not as simple as it sounds. In fact, it has been evolving. And depending on where you are, that same statement may or may not hold the same legal power it once did. Years ago, courts widely accepted that the smell of marijuana alone could justify a search. The reasoning was straightforward. If an officer detects the odor of an illegal substance, that creates probable cause to believe a crime is being committed. But as marijuana laws began to change, legalization, decriminalization, medical use, courts were forced to reconsider something very important. If something is legal, or partially legal, can its smell still justify a search? And that question has led to some of the most fascinating legal debates in recent years. In some states, courts have ruled that the smell alone is no longer enough, because now the smell of marijuana doesn't automatically mean a crime is happening. It could be legal possession, it could be medical use, it could even be residual odor from something that happened earlier and is no longer illegal. So now we have a legal gray area. And when the law enters a gray area, your words become even more important, because what you say can either protect you or unknowingly give permission for things to go further. Let's go back to that moment. You're in the driver's seat. The officer says, "I smell weed." There's a pause, and now it's your turn to respond. Most people react emotionally. Some laugh nervously and say, "No, you don't." Others try to explain, "My friend was in the car earlier." Some panic and say too much. And some try to cooperate in a way they believe will help. But here's what experienced lawyers understand, and what many people don't. In that moment, you are not required to prove anything. And more importantly, you are not required to help build a case against yourself. There's a principle in law that protects you here. It's called the right against self-incrimination. You've probably heard it before, but in real life, it shows up in subtle ways. Like this moment, when you're faced with a question or an accusation, and your instinct is to explain. But explanation can sometimes create more problems than silence. So what would a lawyer actually say? Not something aggressive, not something disrespectful, and definitely not something that escalates the situation. Instead, something calm, controlled, and legally precise. Something like, "I don't consent to any searches." That sentence may sound simple, but legally, it carries weight. Because consent is a key factor in many searches. If you give consent, even casually, it can remove the need for further justification. But if you clearly and politely refuse consent, the situation changes. Now the officer must rely entirely on legal grounds, not your cooperation. And this is where understanding your rights becomes critical. Because refusing consent does not mean you are being uncooperative. It means you are exercising your legal rights. There's a difference, and courts recognize that difference. At the same time, it's important to understand something equally critical. Refusing consent does not guarantee that a search won't happen. If the officer believes they have probable cause, they may proceed anyway. But here's the key point. By not giving consent, you preserve your legal position. You leave the door open for a lawyer to later challenge whether that search was justified. And that challenge can make all the difference in court. Now think about this. If you had said, "Sure, go ahead," that challenge becomes much harder because you gave permission, and permission changes everything. This is why lawyers are so careful with words, because in law, words are not just communication. They are evidence, they are documentation, they are decisions, and once spoken, they can't be taken back. Let's pause here for a moment. Have you ever been in a situation where you said something under pressure and later realized it might not have been the best choice? If you have, you already understand how powerful that moment can be. Now imagine that moment, happening with legal consequences attached to it. That's what we're talking about here. And it's not about being guilty or innocent. It's about understanding how the system works. Because the system is not emotional. It's procedural. It follows rules. And those rules can either work for you or against you, depending on how you respond. Over the years, there have been real cases where simple statements made during traffic stops played a major role in what happened next. Not because the individuals intended to say something harmful, but because they didn't realize how their words would be interpreted. And interpretation is everything in law. This is why experienced attorneys often give very consistent advice. Stay calm, be respectful, provide required information like your license and registration. But beyond that, be careful with what you say, because silence is not an admission of guilt. It is a right, and exercising that right is something the law allows. Now let's go deeper, because there's another layer to this that many people don't consider, the psychology of the situation. When an officer says, "I smell weed," it's not just a statement, it's also a test, a way to observe your reaction. Do you panic? Do you become defensive? Do you start explaining? Your response can influence how the situation unfolds. And that's why maintaining composure is so important, because calmness communicates control, and control can prevent escalation. But here's a question worth thinking about. Why do so many people feel the need to explain themselves in that moment? The answer is simple. Human nature. We want to clarify. We want to correct. We want to be understood. But the legal system doesn't always interpret those explanations the way we expect. Sometimes, what you say to help yourself can be used in a way you didn't anticipate. And that's not because anyone is trying to trick you. It's because the system is built to gather information, and anything you provide becomes part of that information. So the safest approach is often the simplest one. Respectful but minimal, clear but controlled, and grounded in your rights. As laws continue to evolve, especially around marijuana, these situations are becoming even more complex. What is legal in one state may not be legal in another. What justifies a search in one jurisdiction may not in another. And that uncertainty makes awareness even more important, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one phrase. It's about understanding how to navigate a system that most people only encounter in high-pressure moments. Moments where decisions are made quickly, words are spoken instinctively, and consequences can last much longer than the interaction itself. So next time you hear those words, or even think about that scenario, remember this. You don't need to outsmart the situation. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain everything. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply understand your rights and choose your words carefully. And now I want to ask you something again. Do you think most people are aware of how much their words matter in situations like this? Or do you think they only realize it after it's too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is more important than most people realize.